6.5 months since the first lockdown and last week's presentation. Here's the past videos in the archive there. Thanks for sending me information, people. And if you want any more, go to that. Okay, contents. Only minor thing is me going on a little site visit. New pieces to read and consultations to respond to, developments in the last week throughout UK, and the weekly rolling slides, thanks to Claire. Okay, this is the biggie webinar. I've put that link on the chat. Please do attend on both of these days if you can. We put a lot of effort into it, got sponsorship and everything. We've got our president, Jenny Jones. We've got everybody's favorite traffic police officer, Andy Cox. Kiara Lee from Road Peace. Stuff on the technology for reporting, including that by the legendary Cycling Mikey. And the next Thursday, they're about an hour and a half, start at 4. We've got Jeremy Leach talking about how to get speed reduction in your neighborhood. Claire Rogers will be speaking about how you win over the local community with regard to low traffic neighborhoods, which we've been talking about. Victoria Lebrec on involving police and crime commissioner. So do please attend, free attendance. We've only got just under 50 people both so far. People do tend to join in towards the end, but if you could, as soon as possible, helps to clarify things, satisfy the sponsors. Okay, things to read. Do go to Simon's summary of the evidence on Waltham Forest. It keeps on being updated, essential for everybody interested in low traffic neighborhoods. Right, here's some stats from Department for Transport. When interviewed between May and July 2020, 39% reported that walking more and 38% cycling more than before the outbreak. Of those that reported they were walking or cycling more, 94% thought they would continue to cycle and walk more once the restrictions were removed. Piece in the Evening Standard from Johnson's former deputy mayor on energy, saying that he thinks low traffic neighborhoods are good. Right, now here's the link. I think I caught you mentioning that from Rachel Aldred. We're mapping London's new low traffic neighborhoods to analyze distribution. Do look at the draft map and email us if we've missed something. And that's the schemes which are now in place. So data will come from that when it comes. Right, now this is a bit of essential reading with a very big graphic, which was quite impressive, not particularly accurate, but what it's about is about the other side. Now these people, DISMOG, are involved exclusively with air quality. And what they've been talking about is how various motoring organizations and the car lobby work against what we're working for. So Logistics UK used to be called the Freight Transport Association, but that sounds kind of more neutral, you know, whose members operate more than half of all lorries in UK, lists as one of its policy achievements as delaying 6 clean air zones for as long as possible. So we want to keep an eye on those people, and groups like DISMOG are exactly the ones that we should be concentrating on, not just on doing the good stuff, but being aware of the bad stuff. Here's a quote, a phrase I've never heard before, big shock theory, in which Brian Deegan, whoever he may be, refers to something called big shock and how that affects transport changes. And apparently we're in a big shock now because of COVID. consultation on the planning white paper. Here's a link to our friends in Transport Action Network who've kind of made it easy for you to get in a response to their consultation. And today or yesterday is a news strategy document for the future from Living Streets. Oh, pick this up on the LTN thing. Again, it's these one people, anything which has got one in the title says, we're going to fight this. This is basically a bunch of pathetic middle-aged men in Lycra. That's us trying to turn quiet residential streets into daytime cycling racetracks, usually even without the support of their wives. And we are going to expose them and their saddle-crushed balls. I mean, that's the kind of, I mean, that is just silly, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's still coming up out there. Right, this is unfortunate because, as you know, Road Danger Reduction Forum's given a lot of support to the initiative of close passing and continued policing from the West Midlands Police Road Harm Prevention Team. And anyway, someone in West Midlands Police Traffic got hold of the Twitter account and they've been pushing the traditional road safety stuff. Everyone has a role to play. We all have responsibility, blah, 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 usual false equivalents. And they kind of changed and deleted some of the tweets after a massive pile-on, which we got involved with and a lot of the rest of you got involved with. His diversity page, nothing new. Last week I did a little count, and on Ideas with Beers we had 21 females and 57 males attending. I did actually do it about 20 minutes after that, and the proportion had upped to about 40% women, so it shows that women have more staying power. The delay slide, it's now 6+ months since lockdown. What's been happening? And it's the 6th time for Alex's tweet. 80% of the government's announced £225 million for walking and cycling is still just a number and an announcement. So when is it going to be announced? And that was going to be early September. So, you know, I do really hope that if we are going into another lockdown or circuit break or whatever they call it, that, you know, we can have people working on what needs to be done, because they are key workers, people putting in temporary infrastructure, people in fact doing things like cycle training are key workers, and stuff should be happening, and it really should have been happening by now. And if anybody knows why it hasn't or what's going on, do let me know. But this is actually getting a bit silly. It's 7-8 weeks when we really can't afford it. Okay, let's look at what's happening on the ground, and it depends where you live. So here's Liverpool West Derby Road, and it's a bus border, which Brian loves. Yes, there it is. I think it could have done with a zebra crossing maybe there. I mean, or semi-zebra, zebra look-alike. I don't know. Your views are welcome. North Tyneside, Living Streets North Tyneside tweeted, we've been looking at the speed reduction achieved in Teignmouth since the introduction of the Sunrise Cycleway. Well done, 80% reduction in motors traveling over 30 miles an hour. And that was something that went in the beginning of July, so that's a bit of good news. Another nice little campaign, the people of Upper Shoreham Road, photos last week. Go to look at it. They got lots of photos of people saying, yes, I use these cycle lanes and it's made it nicer and this is what I do now. They got loads and loads of photos, and they're claiming 1 in 22 journeys made rather than 1 in 61. Oxford, not good news. The bus gates, opposition in the consultation of, but the majority of residents were in favour. I think they included people who drive into the area there. Kent, oh dear, and one of the councillors said something stupid today about how cyclists shouldn't be on a road or whatever. It's from Gary Outram. Local press reporting 1 in 3 of the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes from Kent Cycling, Kent County Council are already abandoned, and that Kent County Council will not introduce any further schemes without prior community consultation. They've got a plan for a Tyne-Wade 20-mile-an-hour limit for Faversham. Here's another bit of bad messaging from them on, this is what the cycle training image is, someone getting up for a sprint in the Giro d'Italia. Apparently the active travel people are quite good in Kent County Council, but this is done by, guess what, the road safety officers. So as usual, wrong kind of messaging. Tamestide, here the Staley Bridge North Ward members launching an active neighbourhood. They call them active neighbourhoods rather than low traffic neighbourhoods. And this is the publicity they use, active neighbourhood, positive message, and there it is. So a bit of positive stuff. Northampton does a U-turn on introducing a one-way and cycle lanes. Negative stuff. And here is the 11 Avenue, Bournemouth filters. Yeah, you can see they're all communist revolutionaries with the clenched fist salute there. Actually, that was what was claimed in one bit of particularly silly propaganda from the Ealing high traffic neighbourhood scheme. But anyway, there's a nice lot of them. All maybe not perfectly socially distanced, but they're all masked up. Newcastle, here's the thing, got this from Carlton Reid, bit of Newcastle Geordie speak. And they've claimed 4,900 daily journeys on foot and 1,350 by bike have been recorded across the 5 areas where low traffic neighbourhoods are currently being trialled, and they're documented there. So you can see that up there. That's good news from Newcastle. Right, London. Okay, this has gone in Hounslow, Twickenham Road, linking Twickenham to Syon Park and Brentford in there with cylinders, wands, whatever you want to call them. The Lee Green low traffic neighborhood in Lewisham is being reviewed. I think you mentioned that. It seems to be kind of regretfully, there have been problems with it. There's a big letter against it in local transport today. Look, and sure, I don't know if it's going to be modified or completely taken out. There's some information saying a lot of people are going back onto the South Circular rather than using the cut-throughs, but then they weren't supposed to be using the cut-throughs. So if the new strategy is to get them doing that, is that what people really want? A summary from Waltham Forest, now talking about what they've been doing: 10 school streets, new charging points, 2 new low traffic neighbourhoods, 1 business low emission neighbourhood, and new trees. Harrow, they have, this was due to go in on the 9th, the Pinnerview area, and they do say, make it clear, access to all properties is maintained, but there will be no way to drive through the area, which is what it's supposed to be about. A nice little graphic showing which roads you can drive in and out from. And where the filters are. So, you know, any motorist really ought to be able to understand that, unless they're totally locked into Waze or whatever the Google app is. Okay, Transport for London have been taking out the Euston Road cycle lane. Now, I'm not quite sure what that's about. I think there was a possibility of it coming out anyway because of HS2 works. A certain amount of discussion about it. TfL said, oh, you can use one which is adjacent, which is actually about 350 meters away, but it might be the one that you want to use anyway. Danny Williams was saying, I'm not really worried about that because, you know, when it comes out, it's not going to relieve congestion, and we can say that. So maybe, anyway. Lambeth have been saying that they're inundated with requests for low traffic neighborhoods. Important bit of evidence there. Okay, now this is from Westminster. It's from Last Not Lost, the guy who picks up the news that everybody else misses. They've been talking about how income levels within parking have increased over recent weeks with strong recoveries. Paid for parking is now routinely back to above 90% of pre-COVID levels. What's interesting about this is that they're tremendously happy about it. You know, we're getting more money in because more people are driving. Isn't that good? Well, no, it isn't actually. Haringey, all right. This is something on Twitter showing how bad stuff can be if you do it wrong. And it shows that instead of having a solid white line with some form of protection, segregation, wands, cylinders, whatever, and just having mini orcas, no wands or cylinders, what they get is this. Now, here's the lane, and this person has just ducked in here, driven in here. So someone's cycling along and they can't go in because this guy's just decided to drive in to the cycle lane. Well, if there were proper barriers through wands or cylinders, he couldn't have done that. But he did, because Haringey have simply gone against all the government instructions on what's supposed to happen with road space reallocation. Okay, here's my little tour of Kensington High Street in Kensington and Chelsea. Note the position of the wands and the bus lane. Okay, here's one side of the road going eastbound. I find it interesting, the ones coming right up to the end at this signal junction don't position a bus. They haven't gone in for floating bus stops or even bus borders. The buses still go in the cycle lane. How much of a problem is that? Up to you. We've got cycle lane ends there, and really all you have to, the only position you don't have any ones in is in the yellow box. Nice and continuous. There is a problem with motor vehicles parking where it's going to be. This is sort of in the bus stop. And here, there's some big building works just there, which seem to be more or less fully occupied. And this gentleman left his DHL van there, where the cycleway under construction sign is. And they note cycleway junction upgrades, and it's taken a few days ago. Nice to see a bunch of lads coming out on their bikes there. So it'd be interesting to see what happens at the junctions. It looks like a bit of an improvement. I had a nice little ride around, came across Jeremy Vine cycling the other direction. I said, hello, Jeremy. He said nothing in return. I think he maybe didn't hear me because of traffic noise, and I'm not taking it personally. So a lot of reading, as it's all the latest is collected here. What I would urge you to do is read the stuff about the language from the Active Travel Academy, and they've got consultation on that. And also do look at the hit and run petition there. and what I mentioned about the war and the planning system. Some more on adverts. This is from 2015, after Volkswagen got caught. And the next bit is a special thing by courtesy of Brenda Pesch, the inventor of the urban parklet in London, member of the Road Danger Reduction Forum Committee. This is Brenda in 1995. Someone has written next to the BMW advert, for fast, effective relief from stress, go by bike. And with her upside down, that made it onto the front cover of London Cyclist, the London Cycling Campaign magazine in 1995. That's the sort of thing we were doing 25 years ago.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Ali Mccay. So I'm Lecturer of Transport Engineering at Glasgow Uni. So today I'll just give you an introduction to what we're trying to do at Glasgow Uni with our transport teaching, and then take you on a mundane infrastructure tour of Glasgow. Those pieces of infrastructure that people don't notice, but massively improve people's lives. My favorite type. Okay, so I'm sharing a PowerPoint right now. So this is a view from the University of Glasgow down to the south of Glasgow. And we've got massive exhibition centres here. And then what you'll notice is it's quite a green city, despite being massively dense in population, which we'll come back to later. So what I've been doing the last 2 years is updating our transport engineering courses. So I've got this graphic here just to explain what I've been doing in general, so people might be able to pick my brains or ask questions about that later, or perhaps get involved. Where previously we had a pretty normal highway transport engineering course, where a lot of it was rules-based and problems had correct answers. And a lot of the kind of challenges the students had was making complexity in terms of orientation and things like that. But they actually didn't need to use that much judgment and think about things too much. So what I've changed is to make basically the geometry and everything else quite simplified and move towards a principles-based. So thinking about things like the hierarchy of transport in cities, and focusing it on the urban areas. So getting students to think about what's fair, what's right, and then designing for that, rather than going into the rules-based, because they can learn that kind of later on, but to give them that basic ideas. And then all examples are based in Glasgow. So that's what I'm going to go through today. So just to give people an overview, this is what our course is now. So we've got 2 years. So we've got a course in the 3rd year, which is equivalent to English 2nd year, and a course in 4th year, which is equivalent to English 3rd year. So we talk about principles of street design and inclusive streets first, and I included that this year, but actually talking about inclusive streets first didn't work as well as I thought, because the students didn't have enough knowledge yet to really understand what I was talking about. And then we move on to design for walking, and then we talk about designing for cycling, which we've just done today. And then finally, after doing all that, active travel, then we start talking about motor vehicles and designing specifically for motor vehicles. So students have already learnt about curve radii and how small curve radii on side street junctions massively help for walking and cycling on those side street junctions, which I'm sure everyone around here is aware. But then we talk about motorway curve radius when we're getting into the kilometers curve radius. And one thing I didn't expect was that really helps students design better motorway roads, because they can understand that curve radii on a human scale, which they've already done in walking and cycling. So by doing this, one thing we didn't expect in this course was that suddenly students were kind of having more of an appreciation and an inherent understanding of those big car-based roads just from designing walking and cycling first. So that was interesting. And then we look at the classic engineering stuff. If you don't get your pavement materials and design, then it doesn't really matter how good you think about walking and cycling. If the materials crumble, then nothing else works. And then this is new for this year when we take things up to the network level. So we're teaching students now how to design for low traffic cities. So that's our sustainable urban mobility plans. And they learn about things like Ghent's traffic circulation plans and then apply that to UK cities. So if you have an area like Brian's run through last week that you'd like students to do a design for, if you live in a town or a city, then get in touch with me and we can set a student group working on that next year. And they'll provide you with perhaps campaign material and things like that. And just next week, very topical, students will be learning low traffic neighborhoods. And then we move on to multimodal junctions. So the students learn both the Dutch layout and the Cyclops. And in their coursework, it'll be interesting because they have to choose which one is most appropriate. So we'll almost get 80 students voting for which they prefer Dutch or Cyclops. And then finally moving on to public transport. So I'll produce those results in a few weeks' time, I suppose, and see what students think works best. Okay, and the whole courses are based around this paper from Marco de Brommerstraat, I think pronouncing, I can never pronounce Dutch names, sorry, where they developed a language for talking about cycling design and how to use observations to design and then use those observations for critical appraisal and then keep on flowing back and forth. So the course is based around qualitative observations first of people in the street. So students go out and they watch people and they come back with observations that we've all seen. So a student was asked me questions because they happened to be sitting outside a bingo hall and they noticed a lot of old people come out after the bingo. And then no one went to the crossing that was 50 meters away. They all just went straight across the dual carriageway. Not at a necessary fast pace, but that's what they did. They preferred to take the risk on the road rather than going for the crossing. So students are learning these lessons about how people walking and cycling don't necessarily obey the rules that the students expect. So hopefully they take those lessons with them into industry to provide a good foundation for better design in the future. And this is what they're producing. So the top left is something what I'd expect them to produce from their street analysis, where they give the layout of the street and make certain notes. But what I didn't expect was the students, this is civil engineers, I should point out, this isn't art or architecture or geography or people expecting to produce this stuff. Some of them just started sketching without me telling them and produced things like this kind of Lowry image of Glasgow, where you see these dark figures walking along to show this kind of human scale, as well with very detailed curb. So already connecting this detailed engineering choice with kind of noticing the humans on the street too. Now we've got a student do a nice figure here, where they show people waiting at the crossing, some with headphones on, which is quite every right to do so. So we discuss things like that in class, and then look at the disparity between the people trying to cross the street and those vehicles. Okay, so that's just a quick overview, so you know what we're up to at Glasgow Uni. So if you want to get involved, then please get in touch with me. I've put my email at the start, but I guess you just search for me and Glasgow Uni, and you'll find me. So I'll introduce some of the more mundanely interesting aspects of, so I'll stop my share and then go into, where am I? Here I am. Okay, and one thing I should mention is if you know Robert Wheatman, who is now at Living Streets, then he was instrumental in setting up this course. So a lot of it comes from Robert's ideas, which I'll talk about in a second. So here's a map of Glasgow, for those of you who don't know the city too well. So here we are, these red roads are our urban motorways. So if you don't know that the plan was actually to link up the motorway between here and here to create an inner ring road, and also have an outer ring road as well going on, something like this. So they only got halfway with building half the inner ring road. So in some ways it would have been nicer to build the outer ring road first and then have a usable ring road, but no, we've got a motorway right through the middle of the city. So what we're going to do is take you to Partick next. So that's in the west of the city, near the River Clyde. And then this is the River Kelvin, which you'll know from your Kelvin temperature scale. And this is the area called Partick, and it's an old industrial site in Glasgow. And it's the town motto is actually wealth through industry. So you can get the idea of the type of place it was. So what we're going to do is have a look at one of Robert Wheatman's blogs first. And this is what Robert produced on something called I Want My Street to Be Like This, where Robert very eloquently and very interestingly introduces the differences between Dutch street principles and UK street principles. And this is Robert's graphic of a Dutch street. So notice it's got road bricks, it's got bollards around the corners, it's got people cycling and trees and parking in its proper place. So I'm going to take you to Partick now. So welcome to Glasgow, everyone. This is a typical Glasgow street. You'll see with the tenements. And these are working class design tenements, which you can tell because they've got small gardens at the front, so almost straight on the street, typically 3 or 4 stories. And you tell inside they generally have 1 or 2 bedrooms. whereas other areas were kind of designed for the merchant classes, but still in tenements. And if you look at this, you'll be all thinking like, why am I showing you this? It's a normal access road in the UK, a typical residential street. There's nothing special going on here. So I'm going to turn you around and let's have a look at this. This is the original Mini Holland in the UK before Waltham Forest got in the Act. This was designed and constructed in 1990. I haven't yet found out if this was designed to Dutch principles or if the council officers at the time just had really good ideas and happened to go along with happened to coincide with what the Dutch principles were doing. But notice it's got the road bricks like in Netherlands. It's got lighter paving material for the footway. It's got bollards at the junction to protect the footway, the junction. If we go a little bit forward, we can see that the parking is off what we might think of the carriageway. So the carriageway is quite thin and constrained, and you generally get human scale driving speeds around this area. So what's different, of course, is that we have the UK markings here and lots of road signs. So I think this is one of the most interesting places in Glasgow because the Glasgow officers during 1990 were coming up with these great streetscapes, great designs, and somehow funding or somehow people left or maybe the political will changed, but it just wasn't continued and we can only find it in certain areas. But it exists, and I think it's a great model for if you're looking at a low traffic neighborhood, how you look at the permanence of it. So if we're looking beyond just the filters, and if we look beyond and think, okay, maybe we can get rid of our black asphalt and create this more Dutch design. And you don't need to go to Netherlands to look at it. You can come to Glasgow. So I'm going to show you another image. And you can see that, welcome to Glasgow, dense population. So this area is 10,000 people per kilometre squared. So we do get rubbish and things that need cleared up. You can see that Glasgow people are just like everywhere else. When there's a bollard missing, they'll park in the footway. But you also notice that these areas, we haven't done much with them in Glasgow. We've just planted a couple of trees. These could have cycle parking, they could have benches, and we could use those to protect those more. But the reason I'm showing you this is the difference in Dutch design comes out. Here we have these very, very steep ramps, very, very small ramps, and they're horrible when cycling. They really give you a massive jolt, and if you're not concentrating, it can make you fall off. So this is the difference, is that even within this kind of low traffic area with really great Dutch design, we've actually got these anti-cycling bits. So you have to watch out for them, and it's something we'd want to improve in the future. So let's have a look at the next place. So now I'm taking you to Maryhill. So I'll zoom out a little bit. We're a bit more in the north of the city. So here we are in Maryhill. So there was a plan for a motorway, which would run from here, over here. I think it would go up here, and then kind of around here or something. That didn't get built. That was actually Vince Cable was leading the campaign against that. So now we're going to Maryhill, this area of Glasgow. Just here, and we're following the River Kelvin up. Okay, where are we next? Here we are on Garriock Road in Maryhill. So again, you notice the tenement streets. And what do we have here? We've got another little bit of Dutch design. But this is one that's slightly more interesting. And I'll travel around. Hopefully my bandwidth will let me do this. And I'll go forward. Here we are. So this is possibly the best example of a low-speed residential street in Glasgow. So it actually continues all the way through. And notice again, Glasgow drivers, if you don't put bollards down, then they'll park their cars. They'll do their best. Maybe they're reducing the width of the carriageway and trying to reduce speeds. But if we go forward, then we'll see that what the engineers, even at that time, understood. If you put a significant kink in the road, reduce the sight lines, put some big metal bollards in the way, you'll get 10-mile-per-hour speeds, which on residential areas is good. So if you want to show people possible for low speed streets in the UK that aren't based in Netherlands, then you can show them this in Glasgow, and it'll you can see the principles here. So what you might also want to do is plant a tree here to further reduce the visibilities. Okay, so I'm going to take you to a similar example that's a bit more modern. So I'm not sure when this was. I think it's from around 2010. So you can see it's got the kink as well. And there's a school right here. And you've got these kind of slightly different tenements. And this was in Pollock Shields in Glasgow, and it was designed as a garden suburb. So think about the garden villages and garden towns and things discussed about. Well, got these garden suburbs in Glasgow. They've got really wide streets. And you might think this is great design as well, where you've got this bit of a kink. Okay, you've got two-way traffic, so you do get good slow speeds here. But again, what have we got on this bump? We've got these cobbles. So we've accidentally, in our design, provided a barrier for people cycling. It's right next to a school. And even me, this is really uncomfortable to cycle over. The cobbles are loose and it's acts quite a barrier. So you've got this really nice street design with your trees, with your bollards to prevent parking, but just this little small detail letting us down, which is a bit disappointing, but you can be grateful for everything else in there. So I'll just go for my next one. Okay, so I'll just show you where we are now. We're now in York Hill, so I'll zoom out a little bit. So that was Pollock Shields, where we just were, just to the south of the river, just next to the massive, massive bit of motorway. And now we're in York Hill, which is this area, between the Clyde and the Kelvin. So this is Finniston, which is the kind of big party area of Glasgow. So 10 years ago, it wasn't, and then they built the events campus with the gigs and stuff. So I think I'm going to zoom in there. Yeah, here we go. Another pocket of Dutch design in Glasgow. This time we've got this kind of diagonal modal filter where it takes people around and you can't drive through anymore. But the interesting thing about this one is it's quite subtle the way they've done it. If I just turn to the side here and I'll let it load up, you can see there's actually an emergency vehicles cut through here, which actually is really hard to notice. And it's the type of thing that I think is quite well designed, because I've never ever seen a driver go through here. There's no cameras or any enforcement, but yet it seems to encourage or enable good behavior for driving because it's a bit subtle. So I've got a few of these from Glasgow to show. So if you're looking at the LTNs in London, which have only stop signs and no enforcement cameras, then this could be the type of thing that you could think about for the future for encouraging good design. And you can see here, again, different to Netherlands, this will be about 30 years old now. So on these red brick streets in Netherlands, I think you've got about a 20-year cycle of rejuvenization, sorry. So we find that after 30 years, we can really see the damage starting to tell. So I'm just going to take you a little bit down the street, talk you something that I'm kind of having a ponder about at the moment. So we're going down. So where have we got here? We've got a donut shop. That's delicious. Just going to go a little bit forward. So here we are. So this is exactly what many of us kind of urban street designers, people might call themselves an urbanist, would talk about as a great place. So we've got this completely pedestrianized area. In both of these buildings, we've got 8 flats. So we've got 4 floors of 2 flats each. And we've got this area, and most of us would assume that this area would become owned by the people living there. They might put out their own plants. They might do other stuff to start living in this, kind of having that as their front garden. What I find interesting about this area is it seems to be completely ignored by the people who live on it, despite being a pedestrian space, and despite what we might think of in our design as being the exact place that people would kind of create this ownership over the front place. So we might think about when we're doing our LTNs and have spaces like this, that if we leave them bare, like Glasgow's done, then it's not enough, and we can't just accept that the communities come and take over the space. They have to have something to take over. So I think that's what London's doing really well, with putting out planters that people can then plant their own plants in, and then you start building it up that way. So I think that's what this place needs, is a couple of little starters for people to start coming out with their neighbours. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few modal filters in Glasgow. Specifically for ones that allow emergency access. So this is one on West Princes Street, which is the closest we have to a cycle street or a quiet way. And you can see there's a little cycle bypass that's definitely not compliant with LTN 120. It's a fun challenge to cycle through this without putting your foot down, but it excludes many people from using it. And you can see they've got really sharp bumps here. And in the 10 years of living in this area, I've only ever seen one driver go through here. So it's quite successful at having no cameras at deterring people driving through, just for the sharp bumps. So I wouldn't say that Glasgow drivers are any better behaved than London ones, but for some reason, simple designs like this allow emergency access, but yet seem to deter the majority of poor driving. Okay, now we've got another similar one next to a Sainsbury's, and this is more your merchant class of tenements. So each flat here is slightly bigger. They've probably got bigger windows. Each floor is quite tall. So you've got this kind of distinct area in Glasgow. And here we've got another fire path place for emergency vehicle access. And this one's changed slightly since it was first built. And they've put these collapsible bollards on. So I think the deal is that the fire truck just goes through and smashes them up. They're not the bendable ones. And what we've got here is an actual place where the emergency services have asked that you leave this open to emergency vehicles. And over time, they've stopped using it themselves. So that means we've got the option to start closing that off properly for vehicles and not rely on any sort of good behavior from drivers. And I'll just finish that off with this one from Clouston Street in Glasgow, where they've gone the whole hog. So originally this was open to emergency vehicles, if you can still see it. And then the emergency vehicles just stopped using it, and they found that the response times was just as quick without using it. So I assume with some consultation with Glasgow City Council, you get your permanent modal filter. It's not as well landscaped as many London ones, and we still see poor parking next to it. But it shows how you go from this stage of, we'll leave access to emergency vehicles. Emergency vehicles find with the lower traffic, they don't need to use that access so more as much. And then we transition to more of a permanent modal filter. Okay, and then just one for all the people who really want to see it. Here is Victoria Road in Govan Hill in Glasgow. And you might be looking at this and thinking, oh, this is a classic UK road. We've got a really nice high street, quite a wide footway. We've got these nice modal filters, which have continuous footways across, so you can't turn across them. But yeah, we've got this massive toxic road. So I'm just going to take you forward in time. Okay, here it's loading up. So it's loaded up on my screen, so I imagine it'll take a second for you to see it as well. Now we have these really nice, good quality cycleways going up and down the roads, and they're going, eventually will go all the way to town. Like many cycleways in the UK, their junctions, even though they're brand new and they're still getting built, I'm just going to pop up here. Hopefully you can still see this. Okay, my internet's slowed down. These junctions are now more or less no longer compliant with LTN 120, because this is actually, I've taken you to the wrong one, sorry. This is actually a good example where we've not got the yellow lines going across, but in most of them now we have yellow lines going across and we don't have the continuous cycleway. So it's been interesting to see that the cycle activists in Glasgow, called Go Bike, have been talking about how you need to improve these junctions and have submitted alternative designs. Those alternative designs are basically what we see in LTN 120. So it shows how the people campaigning for better streets are ahead of the curve when it comes to design. I'll just finally finish off my tour of Glasgow's mundane infrastructure with Thomas O'Cornwallis from Twitter. It's good to follow. With our new Dutch junction on that street. So it hasn't been finished yet. It should be finished next week, I think. And you see, we've got our zebras across the cycleway, then a waiting area. And we've got cycle lights for circulation inside. And what's notable about here is we've got the zebras in line with the signaled crossing, which a lot of people say you can't do. So it'll be interesting to see how these junctions operate. Okay, Brian, that's what I wanted to take people through today. I hope people enjoyed that tour of really basic infrastructure that improves people's lives, but they'll never know about it. You'd ask people about things in Partick and they would never even notice.
Okay, I'm gonna talk a quick introduction about wayfinding and why it's important. And like in all this decluttering nonsense, we need some signs back out in the streets, but we'll get to that later. I want to talk a little bit about my history in wayfinding. I want to talk about mental maps and show some like pithy examples and how that's the best way into the subject really, and a little bit of research that I've come across. Quite hard to get hold of some of this research, you'll find, but I've been privy to some in my time and I've taken a few notes, so I'm going to show it. Yeah, just a quick bit on my history. When I started working on London Cycle Network all those nearly 20 years ago, I was asking, what's the wayfinding strategy for cycling in London? And I went to TfL. I said, oh, what's the wayfinding strategy? What signs we put up? And he said, we're working on it. And then I went, okay. And then the next year I asked, and then the next year, and it became a kind of annual event for me to ask TfL what the actual wayfinding strategy was for London, of where we put signs. And at the time it would just carry on, maybe put the LCN signs up, maybe we start transitioning to LCN plus signs. We don't really know. Eventually they kind of invited me over and locked me in a room with a report and said I could read the report in the room, but I couldn't take it out. These are some of the things I remember from that report, and they're quite interesting, the issues that everyday cyclists have with trying to get around. So yeah, these are the things that happen. I'm sure we all recognize these, and hopefully a good wayfinding system would do something about them. So a cyclist attempts to follow a general direction and reaches a cul-de-sac or dead end. I had a classic one of these in Sutton where I was happily riding for about 15 minutes. Did the same in Thamesmead for about 20 minutes and then just got to a complete dead end and had to go back with my tail between my legs. Pretty difficult. I would have liked to known at the start of that cul-de-sac, would have been good. Linear route, the cyclist fails to spot specific turning, so no direction signs. Lots of them have been removed, been decluttered out the streets. It's a real problem. And a cyclist doesn't receive the information, no kind of confirmation that it's going right, that it feels right. No indication that there's obvious turns in there. We kind of all recognize these situations, particularly if you're in a new area, you don't quite know where you're going. Just to see the flash of some kind of cycling sign, there you go. All right, it's okay. Someone's thought about cycling here. There's a sign, and without them, and there aren't many left, it gets quite difficult. So really, the art of good wayfinding is enable people to not get lost. And people might be saying, oh, we've all just got phones now, but it's quite difficult to be on your phone constantly when you're riding around, and a little bit annoying. And if you're like me and your phone always runs out of battery, what do you do then? Let's have a little look at it. So sent me on a bit of a mission really to figure stuff out. And I'm going to draw attention to a chapter I wrote in this book. One of my heroes, Peter Cox, put together. How I met Peter Cox is a long story I'd take you into, but I know I've only given myself 15 minutes there. But what I did for this book was to do what I like to call an ethno-methodological phenomenology, which is basically a fancy way of saying I didn't know what to do. And that's the kind of method without a method. You just look, you follow people around, you ask them and go, there's no real model to test. It's kind of against normal academic work. I just didn't know. I didn't have a clue how people were getting around. I kind of didn't really have a clue how I was getting myself around. So I was asking various people over the years and finding out what tactics they use, given that there weren't many signs to follow, and London's quite a confusing place. We came up with some kind of archetypes which were in that chapter there, and I came up with some conclusions and really went on to feed into the research that I do afterwards. So there's an interesting quote there. What kind of coping mechanisms do people use, and can that actually be used to inform others? Now, one of the most interesting techniques I found in London was the orientation by the rivers and the bridges, particularly in central London. This is the one I use myself, so I was quite happy that people came up with it. I kind of do a grid of main roads and whereabouts I am compared to where the river crossings are. So now if I'm going to go south, then I'm going to have to hit one of those bridges, and I make a little mental grid. It's just the problem with my technique is when I go South London, and suddenly the river that I'm orientated is not to the south, and my grid has to flip upside down, and I get massively confused about which way's up and down. Anyway, there's a whole chapter of that fun if you have a good stocking filler for Christmas book. One of the really interesting bits of research, and for me still the best in the world at it, is the kind of legible London research. We've all seen that. It's very popular, those signs, and I think they absolutely nailed the principles of what a good wayfinding system should be. So let's just read those through quickly. And they should be seamless. Yep, keep out. It should be predictable. should be inclusive. Everybody should be able to use it. If you see in the legible London stuff, you can tell where buildings are, you can see the streets you want to go. It's kind of orientated in what you're looking at. It's great. It's at that kind of human scale. So it's meant so you can stand there and look at it and work, and it kind of feels like a kind of the monoliths, particularly like a person standing there telling you, name the places. It's like when to number and when to name is like a fundamental issue. So name the places, and that progressive disclosure, if you give it all to people at once, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but remember when we were doing the Quiet Ways research, and I was behind the glass screen watching people look at a map, and it was completely mind blown to me because nobody had a clue how to read a map, and we put TfL cycle guides there, and people were trying to read them like they were novels, and it was completely confusing mental affair. And I was like, people don't even know how to use maps. Certainly anybody younger than I didn't. And it made me think, why do we keep doing cycle maps then? Maybe we need to find some different ways of getting this information across. So anyway, don't make me think. That's I think a fantastic principle. You should just go, oh, it's that, cheers. Now, if I'm even cycling past the legible London one, again, because I do that orientation on the river, if I see a splash of blue, I know the river's over there, I'm back onto my grid. Anyway, there. And parsimony, which I would pick up, parsimonious, but I'm going to move on. So yeah, it's a key factor. It's one of the reasons people state for not cycling. It's confusing out there. There's a lack of knowledge of where to go. I've changed many people's lives by saying, do you know about that crossing there? Do you know about the cut through? My little Soho loop that gets you across the barrier between Westminster and Camden has changed a lot of people's commute. So that getting that knowledge over, and wayfinding and signing is a really effective way of doing that. Pass the knowledge on so people don't have to go like many of us on this call do and scour every street going, interesting cut through there, I'll make a note. Pass that on. So yeah, the level of confidence will impact the mental capacity to wayfind. So some research we did on the Quiet Ways, here's some like we're trying to ask like the kind of near market, the less confident people, or people who are actively considering cycling, what they wanted. So like so some interesting things to bear in mind if you are planning wayfinding systems or you want to get involved in it. Riding a bike's not automatic behavior. Interesting to say that, especially like when you, as easy as riding a bike is, it's a completely mental thing really, the way you balance on a bike when you start thinking about the physics of it all, which maybe I'll cover that another time. Bike rides on roads are not relaxing, particularly on road. Streets can be all right. We find it quite relaxing, but we have to acknowledge this about new people, and we have to think about ways of like making them feel more relaxed, and that assurance of the regular wayfinding can help. It takes a lot of concentration. So it's a cognitively difficult task. Now you might think, oh, I'm just cruising, but really you're making thousands and thousands and millions of little calculations to keep you wheeling in line, to check stuff in there, to make sure that car's not going out there. Is he slowing down? Will that person step out? All that's going on there. So you don't want a system that distracts and makes you have to read stuff as you go along. So safety is a huge concern. Again, keeps coming through everywhere, and wayfinding, I think, can go some way to making it easier. People get confused with the following stuff and it gives the wrong information. It can lead to collisions, and we don't want any of that. Okay, I'll jump on because I've got more stuff to show, but there's some interesting like facts to go there. So wayfinding's about creating a route. I mean, we're talking about area-based stuff, but really like your route is your start and the end, and where you go. There's a classic one. I've gone to the station, or I might pop to the shop, I might go to the school, and plan it. Everybody's planning these individual routes. Start thinking about that. What kind of tools do we look at? You've got the kind of planning ones. Certainly when I was doing that research, there's lots of people who wouldn't go out on their bikes until they'd planned a route on all their maps, and they drew it on and they did it, and that turn to that turn, that turn. Some people are like that. Most people aren't. But some people can assume that everybody's got access to this planning information, like the local maps and the local guides, and they're checking out on Google Maps. Most people are just trying to get from A to B and go, is it that way, or following someone. So when you're en route, bus stops can be helpful because it can tell you kind of where you are. and you can see from the bus where it's heading, but sometimes buses go really weird ways and use like roads that you might necessarily want to follow on. So all this kind of information's out there, and when there's like a dearth of wayfinding information that's specifically designed for cyclists, this is what you kind of have to look at. There might be some cycling stuff in there. You might have some knowledge of some map. You're looking at the street names. Does that go into that? Like, okay, that's a drive. It's going to be a dead, or close will definitely be a dead end. A road's probably going to go, oh, is it a Roman style road? Will it be orientated that way? All this stuff can go on there. So there are different tools to look at. Anyway, what the users want, we asked them. So they want assurance. They want at a glance confirmation that they're going the right way. Everybody wants a little pat. And when we're doing the quiet ways, I said, if we're going through any kind of like a state or something where people would feel a certain amount of social unease, then repeat the signs regular and regular and regular. Say, oh, it's okay, you're on the route. It's okay, you're on the route. It's okay. I know it doesn't look like it might go around the back near those bins, but it's okay. You're still on the route. So people need that assurance. And that confirmation that you're still on it. So you also need to know, well, what route am I following? What's the end destination? How far it is, or how long it will take me to get there? This is what people have asked us. It's all obvious stuff I know, but we're getting there. All this stuff went in to make the Quiet Ways signing guidance. So after the many years, the some 12 years of waiting for the wayfinding strategy, I finally got to work at Transport for London and said, right, where's this wayfinding strategy that everybody's been working on? And you're like, yeah, there isn't one. So I'll just write my own. I think I've done enough research now. So luckily let me have a go at doing this. And it's changed color. It's changed color a bit like my face did when I put all that green on, but it's still very much the same standards. And I still think they're good, but there is perhaps further we can go. We'll talk about that in a bit. I wanted to show some like cheeky mental maps, because really the essence of understanding wayfinding is knowing your own mental map and how it works. I've done a Manchester and London example in there. Like this Manchester one is on an area that I used to live in, the Quaddy, as I called it, which apparently it's called the Quadrant. Who knew? Who knew? I certainly didn't know at the time when I was younger. And at the time, this is the way, if I was like heading that way towards town, yeah, through the rain and the kind of ring of shit that kind of covers like Manchester city centre there, the kind of, I've never been up there, I've never driven up there, I don't know, but there's like an inner ring road, a bit like Glasgow's one, and it's like pretty nightmarish to go through the area. Before it, difficult, poison. Can you get there? When you do, you're in like the nirvana of the city centre. Where I was going out left, the tram line, and got the cricket and United and Media City's in there now, and Trafford Centre and the Uni, and then it gets a little bit ropey. And this is at the time. Apologies to Salford people, but this is my perception of the time there. Further along from that, it's just nothing but farmers and dinosaurs, and who knows what is down that part. Heading the other way. I know I go past Morrissey's old house. Yep, used to know where that is, just around the corner. Then there's the Mersey, and then it gets all posh. And if I go there, I'm probably going to get arrested for looking the way I did at the time. Over to the right is the kind of cultural area. You know, your Bee Gees lived there, and Ian Brown back when he was cool, and all the arts and all the stuff, and all the great stuff in Chorlton. So that was my view at the time. These are all the things that's important to me and all the knowledge I needed to kind of get around that area. So it's really worthwhile doing this. And I think with communities as well, it's an often overlooked part of low traffic neighborhoods, but just letting people know where to go in their areas and what interesting places to get to. I think Waltham Forest, Claxon Alert, they did it quite well in their area, pointing out places of local interest, but all starts with just doing this kind of exercise. What's important to people and where do they go? So excuse my cheeky one, but there's Manchester. And I quickly done one in London just before, just to show a similar kind of approach. The is the Urban Movement Offices, which is in Farringdon. Nice little advert there. And yeah, this is my kind of mental map of where I go and what I do when I'm in the centre of Farringdon. Now, yeah, I've got the bridges. So now that's my grid system that I use, and that's how I kind of navigate around. So I kind of color coded for how easy they are to do. So the one straight down, I've got the north-south superhighway cracking straight to TfL. I was going to put that in. all good. And you've got the kind of Southwark Bridge, which is, you know, pretty damn decent. Can get a little bit weird at the junctions, but, you know, not too bad. And Westminster with the connection at Wellington Street, pretty good route there, and not such a bad route through Covent Garden. Like I say, with Southwark Bridge, not such a bad route around the side of Guildhall there, and the Quiet Way route. In between those blocks, it's a complete maze of streets that, even though I've lived in London for many years and I kind of cycle everywhere, it's nightmarish. You're going to come across one-way streets and dead ends, and particularly the further west you go. So who knows what's going on there? And it's very difficult to find any kind of easy ways through. When you head south to the kind of superhighway, you've got the great east-west, and I was so happy when that went in, because it was finally a fairly clear way of going east-west across central London. We'd waited long enough for it. If it was going from Farringdon, then you're on Clerkenwell Road, and that's the dash, right? It could be all right. You could just cruise through, or it could be quite difficult, and it can often feel like buses are heading straight to you as you're heading to like a Theatreland. Going over to Oxford Street, you've got the impenetrable kind of Maginot Land that is the border between Camden and Westminster. Like there are a few known ways through there, but you really have to speak to old wizened people to find your way through there. Going past the other way, you kind of, all right, it's iffy, but it's not too bad into the city. And then you can kind of wiggle your way through to Hackney. You've got to think about how you're going to cross that inner ring road. I mean, it goes all the way around this area, and plotting your way is interesting. And just if I'm heading to Camden, I know it's just going to be a kind of wiggly affair, getting through the streets, maybe follow that Leeds superhighway, maybe not. The little nice bit of green bit is Royal College Street. By the time I hit there, I go, yeah, here we go. It's all getting decent again. And just to finish off on my going through the city, I know I do a left and then a first right, and there's a way through the maze of the city. If you always go left, first right, left, first right, left, first right, gets you from Southwark Bridge right the way through to Lever Street and the connections into Islington. Anyway, so that's the kind of mental map, and just wanted to introduce that concept. I think it's a really interesting one to do with communities, and to even do yourself, and really you want some kind of wayfinding system that gets that knowledge over. I was planning one in central London. Tell me where the bridges are would be really helpful. Help me through the mazes and reassure me. Plot my way with gateways and crossings across the inner ring road. It's obvious stuff of how it ticks together, rather than just like you're following one particular route. It's okay. We still have a long way to go in London. And just my little spoiler is the B network wayfinding guidance is due out shortly. We're starting to conclude negotiations with the Department for Transport. It will introduce for the first time in the UK the concept of canoe punting, the stuff we stole from the Dutch, like all good ideas, and the Belgians in this case. So we'll hopefully put some guidance on there. I think it's gone as close to that mission that I put in that in the chapter of the Cycling Cultures book of trying to get something that actually reflects people behaviour and the tactics they use to get around and pass that knowledge on. We're getting there. I don't think it's the end of the road yet, but it's the latest stab we've had. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share on wayfinding. Oh, and I dropped it with 3 minutes to go. Anybody got any questions on that? Hopefully there was a few kind of interesting pointers if you've ever been interested in it. Maybe there's only just me that's ever been interested in wayfinding, but somebody has to be. Any questions, comments?
Just a comment that's one of the best little segments we've had on Ideas with Beers, that last 10 minutes you've just done, sir. Thank you very much.
Oh, cheers, mate. You never know in Zoom how things are going now. You're just like talking to yourself in a little box. But yeah, that's all good.
Hello.
Yeah. Go on, yeah, Ruth, and then Luca. I'll bring you in, mate. So go on then. Go on, Ruth. Ruth, go for it.
Very quickly, I have to say the numbering system in Holland isn't all it's cracked up to be, because often they've added new numbers and they're not on the maps and blah, blah, blah. But they do have useful maps at every major junction, and that's fantastic. Yeah. Somebody made a comment you may not have picked up on, that they need to be on square poles so people can't twirl them around, which would be is very important. And personally, I like distance, not time, because we all cycle at different speeds, and it's easier to judge 4 miles from walking than 4 minutes, which for someone could be a minute and someone could be 10 minutes.
That's I'd like to quickly on two of those. One, yeah, anti-rotational clip fixings, we've got that. Like square poles are good as well. But just on the time, well, when we tested it, and this is why it's interesting doing market research. Like people who were considering it really wanted the time. People who were already doing it really wanted the distance. So we went, well, they were already doing it. We want to. It's kind of a little bit of a marketing one to use the time. So that's why I'm like a fan of time stuff. Should I bring in Simon next? Go on.
I was just going to say, I think that was really timely. Simon Still's LCC blog on wayfinding as well is really great. I just think we have a real massive need now. If we're getting loads more people cycling in London, in other cities, they have no idea where they're going. You know, this is a real issue. The schemes are popping up all over the place, and you can't tell where the schemes lead you towards.
Yeah, indeed. Luke, did you want to come in, and then I'll bring Tim?
Yeah, actually, my comment was going to be that it was a really great presentation. I mean, my own experience in London is like, I take the quiet ways. I try to take the back streets that people or that the system tells me to take. And then I end up on a main road, and I just end up going from tube station to tube station because that's how I know London. So yes, this wayfinding thing it's a really good presentation. Just wanted to say that.
Great ways. I mean, I used to take people from I said I'll take you from Camden Town to Waterloo, and you won't see any cars. And I would go, oh, but London's completely congested. I just go, no, I've been building stuff. And like everybody knows, oh my God, why doesn't everybody know about this? I've been trying to get signs up on it. And
Fine. I think we've lost Brian.
Brian, we lost you there.
Am I back?
Yeah, you had Zoom freeze.
Can I jump in, Brian?
Brilliant, the Joker just said then. Yeah, so go on, Simon.
Oh, so would so my view is that the TfL signing strategy, the sort of quiet way, cycleway signing strategy was really good. Has your thinking moved on from that? You know, have you learned anything since now that's been implemented?
Well, yeah, the big difference in Manchester was it was a walking and cycling network, so I needed to get a little bit more fine tune off it. And still, it's the other issue as well is the numbers. It always comes down to the numbers and how much people interpret. So how do you do a local network when you've got individual route numbers? Because with Manchester, like 1,700 miles planned. So each individual segment, if they've all got different route numbers, that's completely insane. So that's why we looked at that kind of area, just number where they meet, and it cuts it down somewhat. So really what I've learned is to try and do the Dutch and try and get that kind of more walking fine-tuned element to it. So what happens if you've got like an overall London big network, but how do you do it for each individual street and tie it right down? That's what we're trying to get across in Manchester and having a stab at anyway. And I think the Dutch have an answer to that. Albeit we've got a slightly refined version of Kniepunten, because I've spotted a few issues as well.
That TfL document is on their website and can be downloaded, isn't it?
Yeah, if you go to TfL Streets Toolkit, it's in the LCDS section.
And when can we expect the B Network one?
Yeah. I've told not to give dates anymore.
Yeah.
But
soon.
Yeah, soon.
Soon, in the future.
Yeah, okay, if I don't get signs up quick, I'll be out of the job. Tim, did you want to come in? Did I spot Tim? Our man in York.
Yep. Yeah, just your point on numbers in cycling in Belgium. We cycled around there a few years ago, picked up a map, hired some bikes and followed the numbers dead easy. Really good way. And most roads are letters and numbers, M1, A1, etc. So maybe a hierarchy of network using numbers and a letter to say, you know, the top ones are the super highways. Just a little idea that's popped into my head while I've been having a tea and enjoying a very good presentation.
Yeah, what you've got to be careful with that is there's like systems that make sense to planners. Like the original super highways, like clock face 12 routes, is look brilliant in planning presentations. I don't think anybody who's ridden a super highway knew they were on a clock face with central London, etc. Like people on the motorways don't know that M1 is 1 because it's north on a centre England clock face. So that you can go into it. We call it like 1 OC there, and that's the there, and that's the. It can be really clear to planners and make our jobs easy, but become a nightmare for the end user. And we had that issue, you'll probably remember, on the LCM Plus when we changed to link numbers so that each route was just within one specific borough of the 33 boroughs. So rather than having one route going through there, it suddenly become 12 different numbers. And that was a planning one. And then everybody was planning the network, got so confused, they started putting the link numbers on street. And you got the project people talking about link numbers and everybody on the street talking about LCN route numbers. What a disaster. So we're just going to be careful about simplifying it. Always make sure you check with real people is the lesson to learn from the quiet way. So it kind of blew my mind, just seeing the way people navigated, which is why it's good to do research.
Can I support that, Brian? Because it's Roxanne here from CamCycle, and I don't come from any kind of engineering background, any of those typical fields that you might find in cycling or transport. My background's actually in fashion and business, and my brain clearly works so differently from just about everybody I'm involved in this transport world, and it just becomes so clear to me that you really, really need to reach out to different people because brains work in such different ways. If you understood the weird things I do in my brain to find my way around, I just cannot form a map in the way that most people in this call will do. And I see it all the time with my other campaigners, how they form these maps. And my brain just doesn't function that way. Even things like having numbers for roads, it just doesn't mean anything to me. I need a name, and that name should give some indication of where the road goes or have some kind of symbolism and picture that my brain can hold on to, like you were showing with your emotional maps. But I just cannot make this point more strongly that people's brains just do not work the way that transport engineers' brains work. And it's kind of funny that you're designing for the rest of us to get around and we can't understand what you're doing.
Well, yeah, that's why in the chat.
Can I say something as Roxanne asked for a psychologist, and I'm a psychologist.
Excellent.
From Cambridge as well. That's what I did. But I did my undergraduate degree on mental rotation. So there's some evidence on mental rotation, and there is gender difference in rotation and map reading. So and this is factual. It's not, that isn't sexist to say there is difference. Yeah. So I think Roxanne's exactly right. The whole point of psychology is to take the world it is and look at how people's brains work. And I was going to talk about the cycle network numbering we did in Nottingham, which used numbers, but actually it's really important to look at how real normal people who aren't engineers, who aren't going to do this, use it. And to use the people's mental maps are very different. And I'll just tell you one quick story about the work we did in Camden on cycle routes, and we were looking at wayfinding, and we wanted to put local landmarks. And we were going to use King's Cross Station. And we went to a secondary school in Camden and went to speak to the year 9 and 10 people. And they said, oh, yes, we noticed there's a big sort of weird couple of big buildings on Euston Road. We don't know what they're for. They'd never got long distance trains. They had no idea what King's Cross and Euston stations were about. No idea. They knew where the Lidls were. They knew where the shops and Spa was. And they had absolutely meant zero to them. What everyone else, the transport planner, would say, these are gigantic train stations. Of course, you should know what they are. So I think we've got to be very careful of our own inbuilt assumptions and unconscious biases, about what people use as landmarks.
Yeah, that's almost like the conclusion. And I think we should probably use that as a conclusion.